Imagine sitting down to play a board game with two other people, but as soon as you start, you realize the rules are rigged. Every time you earn something, the game forces you to hand it over to the other two players. You do all the work and they get all the rewards. In 18th century France, this was reality. Society was split into three groups called the Three Estates. The first and second estates were a tiny handful of wealthy clergy and nobles. The third estate was everyone else, millions of commoners, from farmers to merchants. If you were in that massive third estate, you carried the entire financial weight of the country. You had to pay taxes to your local noble, a direct tax to the government, and a cut of your income to the church. The wealthy nobles and clergy paid exactly zero. Even though these commoners funded the entire nation, they had no say in how the country was run. If they wanted to vote to change the tax laws, the wealthy elites could simply team up and outvote them every single time. You can only push people so far before the math stops working. When you force 98% of a population to give up everything they earn while completely ignoring their voices, the system becomes fragile. Eventually, it has to break. The breaking point arrived when the French government completely ran out of money. The king had borrowed heavily to fund overseas wars, and the lenders were charging massive interest rates, draining the royal treasury dry. To make matters worse, severe weather ruined the crops. With less wheat available, food became incredibly scarce. Some bakers and merchants held on to what little grain they had, artificially driving up the price of bread so high that regular families couldn't afford to eat. Starving, exhausted, and bankrupt, the commoners finally stood up. They rejected the king's authority entirely and formed their own governing body, calling themselves the National Assembly. Flipping the board in frustration is one thing, but running a country takes a plan. To keep society from falling apart, these newly empowered citizens had to come up with three clear principles to replace the old rigged system. The first new principle was equality. For centuries, your bloodline determined your future. The revolutionaries decided that from now on, your success should be based entirely on the effort and skill you bring to your work, not the family you were born into. This historical document is the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. It officially put this new rule in writing, ensuring that everyone, whether they owned massive estates or baked bread, would follow the exact same laws and pay their fair share of taxes. Notice the physical shape of the document. Because many commoners couldn't read, the creators painted the text on large shapes resembling ancient stone tablets. This sent a clear message that these new rules were universally applied and unbreakable. So equality meant the end of special treatment. A noble title could no longer protect you from answering for your crimes, and it could no longer excuse you from contributing to the nation's survival. The second principle was liberty. Under the old rules, the king dictated almost every part of a person's life. Now, they were citizens with freedoms that belonged to them from the moment they were born. In everyday life, this meant you could openly share your opinions and publish your thoughts without the fear of government censorship. It also meant the authorities could no longer throw you in prison just because they didn't like you. This image shows a red cap, pinned with a blue, white, and red badge. Revolutionaries proudly wore these because they were traditionally worn by freed slaves in ancient Rome. It was a physical way to show their new freedom. However, this new freedom had a massive blind spot. In these early days, the right to vote and actively participate in government was strictly limited to wealthy men who owned property. Millions of poorer commoners and all women were entirely left out. Even with those deep flaws, the core idea took root. For the first time, people across France began acting like citizens who owned their own lives, refusing to be treated as the king's property. The final principle was fraternity. The commoners quickly realized that their newly won rights were fragile. If they tried to stand alone as individuals, the wealthy elites would easily overpower them. To explain this idea, they used this ancient Roman symbol. It's a bundle of rods tied tightly together. The lesson is simple. If you hold just one stick, you can snap it in half. But when you bind dozens of sticks together, they become impossible to break. This sense of brotherhood became the glue holding the movement together. People committed to defending their neighbors against corrupt officials inside the country and fending off foreign armies trying to invade from the outside. Without that shared loyalty, the elites could have easily turned the poorer citizens against each other. Fraternity provided the shield that kept equality and liberty safe. Once these 3 rules were put into practice, news of the new system traveled quickly beyond the borders of France. The concepts spread quickly. International scholars visiting the region saw this system working and took the ideas home. The Indian scholar Raja Ram Mohan Roy, for example, was deeply inspired by these events, drawing on them to push for liberation in his own country. Here is a bust of Olympe de Gouges. She saw that women were being ignored by the new laws, so she used the revolution's own logic to draft her own document, directly demanding equal rights for women and citizens. It took over a century of continuous struggle and pushback to force society to actually play by these fair rules. Eventually, those efforts achieved massive milestones, like finally securing the right to vote for all citizens, completely reshaping who holds power. You see the results of this struggle every day. Whenever you cast a ballot in an election, whenever workers demand fair pay, or whenever a community organizes a protest against an unfair law, they are relying on these exact principles. The fairness we expect in our lives today was earned through this history. We are playing a game whose rules were rewritten at great cost over 200 years ago.